And joining us now with reactions to President Trump's speech is Rod D. Martin. He's chairman of the Institute for the American Future, a board member at the Center for Security Policy, as well as the founder and CEO of Martin Capital. Good morning, Rod. Thanks for joining. Your initial reaction to President Trump's speech last night.
Well, the president did a fantastic job last night of laying out the case for the war. And, you know, I'm for this. I believe in what the president's doing. But the truth is, they have struggled to lay out that case as well as he did last night. There's not a lot of need to. It's a short-term operation. It's not like we're going to war for 19 years or something like some of the wars that he cited. But nevertheless, it's important that we be very clear as we wrap this up exactly what we're trying to accomplish and why it was worth the effort. And it was. Iran is the centerpiece of every problem in the Middle East today. Every single armed conflict in the Middle East today is armed, directed, and funded by Iran. And the president did a good job last night of pointing out that that funding from Iran in large part came from the United States. When Barack Obama sent nearly $2 billion to this regime, 400 million of it in pallets of cash in unmarked $100 bills sent on U.S. transport planes. Why would you do that? And that money went straight to terrorist groups around the region. So we are cleaning up prior administration's messes. The president made a great case for it last night, and we are very close to completion now.
Yes, focusing on two elements of his speech, the justification for the war, as well as the timeline and contrasting it to previous very long-term campaigns. Can you comment on those two things, Rod?
Well, absolutely. And there is the just actual reason for that. There's also the legal reason for that. The legal reason for that is that the War Powers Act gives the president 90 days of military operations. Once he's notified Congress within 48 hours of commencement, he's got 90 days in which to conduct whatever he's going to do before Congress has to weigh in on whether he's permitted to continue. There is no way on God's earth that Donald Trump is going to let this go as long as 90 days. That is just not going to happen. But second, and by the way, with that, there's not going to be, 250,000 boots on the ground in the way that we did in Iraq. That's simply not on the table. But the practical consideration is there are only so many targets to hit. This is a huge country. We've hit about 12,000 targets now in it between us and our Israeli allies. We have growing help from the Gulf states with whom we are allied, which speaks very well of them compared to some of our supposed NATO partners. And we're beginning to be in a position to see that point at which the Iranian people could rise against the regime, could take back their country. But whether they do or they don't, Iran will not have the capacity any longer to threaten its neighbors, to threaten Europe, potentially the United States, and certainly the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, it's so interesting, too, because a lot of his talk was about oil and gas and energy. And just a few years ago, it was like you couldn't talk about that. But the reality is those NATO partners do get their energy from Russia and from the Gulf, whereas he frequently is telling Starmer when they meet that they have oil that they should be tapping. And it's sort of like a no-go conversation. What are your thoughts about all of the various elements? He particularly addressed, of course, the price at the pump, which now is above $4 a gallon. So did the president come off well in that regard about energy?
Well, he is right and you are right. The Europeans have shut down virtually all of their capacity to generate energy at home. We published an article on this at rodmartin.org this week called Drill Europe Drill, and just showed the numbers as to what Europe is capable of doing versus what Europe is willing to do. But in the process of that, it's even worse than you state, and worse than the president said, because Europe willingly chose to make itself energy dependent on Russia after Russia went into Crimea, after the first Ukraine war in 2014. They have made themselves secondarily dependent on the Middle East for their oil. Why? We're producing more than enough to take care of their needs, and they would be buying from a safe supply source that is guarded by NATO as it crosses the Atlantic, they would not have any of these problems at all. But the obstinance of certain allies really brings into question the continued validity of the NATO partnership, which I strongly support. I believe NATO matters. I think that it actually has outlived its Cold War intentions. I think that it has benefits, but it has zero benefits if our so-called allies won't even let us overfly their territory when we're in the middle of a conflict. And the president and Marco Rubio both yesterday made very clear, and they were right, what we just demonstrated is we don't even need Europe's bases to be able to operate globally. So if we don't need them and they don't want us, we're going to actually have to have that discussion. And that's not a comfortable discussion for the Europeans. They do not have the capacity to defend themselves because they have chosen not to have the capacity to defend themselves. And we're talking about 31 countries, if you throw in Canada, who collectively have a larger economy than the United States. It's just freeloading, it's absurd, and it's about to come to a halt.
And Rod, what's happening inside the political electorate of these various NATO countries that makes them, sort of waffle in their support, or what do you see happening there? Because they're all each leader in each of those countries is doing a delicate dance, it seems like. Can you comment on that?
Well, you do have a tremendous amount of Muslim migration into most of these countries that was deliberately engineered. Angela Merkel was on video yesterday talking about how she was actually trying to use foreign immigrants to counterbalance the growing conservative movement within Germany. I don't know how you can say it any more plainer. She's using Muslim migrants from Syria and Turkey to actually outvote her own people. That's just horribly wrong. So there is an element of that, and we've certainly seen how Starmer has behaved toward the Muslim rape gangs in Great Britain. It's just heinous. It's evil. However, it's important to remember that in Britain in particular, this is a minority government. They have a huge parliamentary majority, but at the last election, they only won 30 or 32% of the vote. This is a government that is in deep trouble, and they don't have to have a general election until 29, but if they did at any point, they would probably get annihilated. And you're seeing significant gains from the conservative right in France, in Germany, across the continent. So these guys may be whistling past the graveyard, and I don't think this is going to end up being as popular for them as they think. But the real bottom line with NATO, and this has been true for decades, is that they feel superior to us. They treat us with derision, with contempt, and with unending condescension, while we pay more than 70% of the bill for their defense. They feel completely entitled to our support at any and all times. They do not feel like they have to help us even escort their own oil through the Strait of Hormuz to their countries. Because, mark my words, we don't import that oil. We are protecting their oil, and they are not lifting a finger.
Well, very interesting set of circumstances politically. I believe that Prince Charles is coming to the White House, not Starmer. You mentioned that they have lost their own majority, and so we'll have to see what happens. But a really interesting point about the expectation that we protect their own oil in the Strait. President Trump clearly looking to counter that yesterday, encouraging them to go get it themselves. Such an interesting conversation. I wish we had more time. Rod D. Martin, always a pleasure to speak with you.
And you.